Welcome to Rebecca Sounds Reveille. Today on the show, we have a very prolific guest who's going to be talking with us about anger and anxiety. He is phenomenal in his work and has an extensive background. He's an author, a speaker. He's been an educator, a marriage and family therapist. He's got a number of degrees, and he has authored 4 books, one of which has sold over 200,000 copies. That book is titled Anxiety, Phobias and Panic, Taking Charge and Conquering Fear. Another book that he has published is Overcoming Anxiety from Short-Term Fixes to Long-Term Recovery. Yes, I want to say that because long-term recovery is really, really important. And also, why did God give us emotions? Along with his latest book, Anger, Taming the Beast. Welcome, Reneau Peurifoy.
Well, thank you so much.
Sorry. Yes, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am just ecstatic with the work that you have done. You have really just touched a part of me that I have focused on with not only myself struggling, but helping other people overcome different challenges that have presented themselves in life, stemming back ultimately to fear, which I think is an underlying issue in both anxiety and anger. And so I think more than anything, you are the person to talk about this particular, well, these 2 particular issues. And so if you could share a little bit more about yourself and moving on into these topics.
Sure, and of course we don't have an hour, so
yes.
It's a broad topic. Well, you know, I started out teaching science. Actually, I was a science teacher. Always interested in animal behavior. I had trained chickens when I was a kid and all kinds of other stuff. But my parents were farmers or came from farming background, and so I switched from animal behavior to human behavior, which some people say was a small step down. But anyway. It's just been something that's always fascinated me. So I was a marriage family therapist for 20 years, specializing in anxiety disorders and trauma primarily. But then, of course, through that you get anger issues and those sort of things. Then I went back into education. I did that for 15 years, and now I'm retired from teaching. And I'm doing some counseling as a pastoral counselor. And working on my YouTube channel and things of that nature. Do some writing. I got another book out going to come out this year.
Oh, this is fantastic. And it takes a lot to get a book out. Many people don't realize you can't just write and expect everything to just magically appear. There's a lot that goes into publishing a book. And for you to have published a book that sold over 200,000 copies, this is absolutely phenomenal. How much work and how long of study did you have to do to put something together that was so profound?
Well, the first book took a long time. It actually grew out of a mail order home-based program that I had. And back when I started working as a therapist, I interviewed some people in the area, and I said, I want to do, actually I found 2 people that were very successful, and I said, I want to do what you're doing. Do you have any hints? And they both basically said, find something that you really enjoy doing, specialize in it, and then you'll make a name for yourself. And then that's basically what I did. I didn't want to do substance abuse and some of those things, and so I found anxiety was just a brand new thing at the time. So I went to the university and I read basically everything that there was on it, and if you can believe it, in about 3 days, because back then panic disorder and anxiety disorders were just beginning to be researched. There wasn't a lot on them. Within about 3 years, of course, it all exploded, and you wouldn't be able to do that again. And I went down, got some training and some people down in LA, and then continued to work on my stuff up here in Sacramento. And eventually came with a program which was probably the first multimodal program, because back in those days you had your cognitive people, your psychodynamic people, and your behavioral people. And you'd go to the conferences, and of course the behavioral guy would get up and everybody would be laughing and throwing spitwads at him, and then the cognitive person would get up and everybody laughing at them. And I said, wait a minute, let's kind of do everything and everything that's known to man, and one of those things will probably work for a particular person, and a different person probably will need a different combination. So I kind of started with a very eclectic mode of just everything I could find, and that's where the first book grew out of. And it was a long writing process because it was my first book, and that's where I learned how to write. Just kind of a funny side note, I had one lady with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and she was an editor for the state printing press here in California. And she was the only client I've ever had that proofed my intake form. And I gave her the rough drafts along with a number of other clients, but she was so funny because she helped me take about a third of the dialogue out of it and really whittle it down and hone it into a much nicer book. And she wrote me this lovely letter after the end of it. She said, I really enjoyed reading this, but I had my pencil in hand, and I really didn't mean to make so many comments, but I had my pencil in hand. Yeah, so she was very valuable. So I write by committee. I write a chapter or a few chapters, and I send it out to a bunch of people, and then they give me feedback. And after it sets for a while, you can look at it, and if everybody's pointing to the same area, you kind of know, well, that area kind of stinks. I need to rewrite that. And and if it's only one person and you like it, then you say, well, it was only one person, and you keep it. So that was the process. That took about a year, the first one.
Yes, I understand that very well. It's a process from obtaining the information that you want, and then getting it down on paper, and then having it edited, and then published and marketed. And it's a long process. It's definitely not easy, but what you're doing is extremely important because both anger and anxiety are issues that people are facing all of the time nowadays, and we're seeing more and more anger. And as you said, anxiety went from one small sort of ball into this open area, and the DSM now has just huge amounts of areas that are being covered in there that people are experiencing, from symptomology to actual other diagnoses, and it seems like they're all part of the same family. So
as you know, the DSM, they'll do a lot of subcategories, and really the issues are kind of the same. It's like with PTSD, post-traumatic stress. They call it one thing if it's been going on for 3 months. They call it another thing if it's been going on longer, and they just have different categories, but it's really the same basic thing.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people don't realize what's happening to them. They're thinking, gosh, I have a problem. I don't want to talk to anybody about this. And recognizing the fact that most of us at one time or another have experienced the same issues, and maybe even a lot of or most of the same symptoms. Right. And so that just allows us to be able to go, okay, I'm normal, so what do I need to do to tackle these things? So the first thing I want to ask you, though, is if we were looking at this and peeling it like an onion, what comes first? And this is kind of like the chicken or the egg, because I know they fuel each other, and that would be the anxiety or anger.
Well, I mean, they're kind of different issues for different people. Some people, I think anger is kind of a separate issue. And of course, my main thing I dealt with was panic disorder, and I've seen a lot of that, and post-traumatic stress. I did a little bit with OCD, and each one has kind of it's a different thing. With panic disorder, where people are having panic attacks, essentially, people would fall into different groups. And in one large group, you had people who had a very reactive, sensitive body.
Okay.
In fact, I would ask them, well, how do you deal with caffeine? And as a general rule, they say, well, I can't drink caffeine. It just puts me up on the roof. And everything that human beings have exists on what we call normal curve. So some people have very reactive bodies, and some people don't. They're the ones that you have to whack upside the head to get them to notice something, right? So the group that I was working with, this particular subgroup, they tend to just have very reactive bodies. So you can compare it to like a house where the wiring's not quite up to code.
Okay.
And if you plug too many things in, then the circuit breakers trip.
Okay.
And that's their anxiety symptoms start to come up. So you have a body that's reactive like that, And again, you can have that type of body and not develop panic disorder, because I've got that type of body. But then you usually have either somebody who's fairly perfectionistic and or has a very high need for approval. And so they get basically caught into a background of stress. And because, they believe, well, they ignore their body and you just got to keep doing, and, you got to do everything perfectly. They basically are having a stress reaction. That's really what their first panic attack is. It's just a stress reaction.
Oh, okay.
They don't know that. And so they think something's, terribly wrong has gone on in their body. And so they start watching their body. And of course, if you start paying a lot of attention to your body, you start noticing a lot of stuff you never noticed before. And of course, they're looking at it through the lens of, oh my gosh, something's terrible going on with me. And again, the more they watch their body, the more they will escalate the symptoms, and they fall into this, what we call a panic anxiety cycle, where they notice a symptom, and of course that triggers fear, which hits the old fight or flight mechanism, which escalates the symptoms. They see the symptoms escalating, and they can start talking themselves into a self-generated panic attack. And over time, this becomes basically a conditioned response pattern. Pavlov and the dogs, you ring a bell, and and you give them some meat powder on their tongue, and then pretty soon you ring that bell and they'll salivate.
Right.
So just thinking of being in certain situations will now start to trigger anxiety and panic attacks. And the bottom line is there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They've just talked themselves into this vicious cycle that they're in. In fact, typical story of somebody like this, I'd say, well, tell me about when your first panic attack occurred. And they'd say, well, life was pretty normal. I was going to school, working full time. Let's see, my fiance decided he didn't want to get married. Oh yeah, my dad died. I don't understand why I had this panic attack. And of course, my response is, back up the truck. I think I could give you some insight on that. And typically they were in a very stressful situation, but they weren't recognizing it as that, because in their mind they had to keep doing everything the way they'd always done it. And that's very typical. Another subgroup that I'd run into is ones where there's some kind of a medical issue going on. They might have, I don't know, they might have had a medication reaction. Or it could be an illegal, like I had one lady, she had an allergic reaction to a anesthesia that was given to her, and that kind of set it off. And of course, once she had, the allergic reaction, she started becoming hyper aware of her body, and then, moving into it. Now, sometimes they also have the reactive body, but it may not be as reactive as that first group. Sometimes it could be an illegal drug. A person does a run of cocaine, his heart starts going crazy, or he does marijuana, has a paranoia experience, and now they start watching themselves, thinking that they've somehow damaged themselves, and that'll take off panic attacks. So yeah, so there's a lot of ways that you can get there, but that reactive body, either perfectionism or high need for approval, or some combination of that, is what I would see a lot. And the thing is these are all normal things. You say perfectionism, and when you read about it in books and stuff, people say, oh no, perfectionism, that's a terrible thing, right?
Right.
But if you want a good worker, you want somebody who's a little perfectionistic, right? And with all traits, I always tell people, look at the opposite. What's the opposite of perfectionism? That's somebody that doesn't care, right? They're the slob, right?
Right.
And so that's not good either. So there's a range, and of course you can be at the high range. If you're outside of that high range, you got to kind of come back into it. And so for these folks, they tend to be at the high range, and sometimes you got to pare them back a little bit more into the middle. But that perfectionism is a good trait. It makes them successful in life. Their boss likes it. Same thing with the need for approval. We call that codependence, all that type of stuff. And of course, that's exaggerated. But what's the opposite of somebody with no need for approval? We call them a sociopath, right?
Right.
They have no need for approval. They don't care, right? Their walls are so rigid, nothing gets in, right? That's no good either. You can't have a relationship with somebody unless you want them to like you. You have to have some need for approval to have a healthy relationship. Now, of course, if it's so exaggerated that it's becoming a liability to you, you need to pare it back a little bit and come up with some boundaries, right? So it's not so much a matter of eliminating these traits, but getting them back into the healthy range and kind of getting them to where they become friends with their body again. And once they do that, then the panic attacks will start to slowly decrease. Probably the hardest thing with working with something like that is the conditioned response aspect of it.
Okay.
because so much of our psychology is insight oriented. Once I understand it, then it should go away and I should be
Right.
better.
Right.
But the truth is if you have a conditioned response, it takes time to desensitize. And the analogy I would give people, it's kind of like if I hook you up to a wire and every time I say purple, I give you an electric shock. Pretty soon you'll start jerking every time I say purple.
Right.
Now, I can explain to you, you're never going to get a shock again. I can dismantle it and you can actually believe me, but I guarantee next time I say purple, you're going to jerk a little bit.
Right.
And that will continue until you desensitize. So they need to, and that's something that's just because of the way, we're very cognitively oriented in our society. It's just something that takes people a while to understand. Okay, I need to manage the symptoms and they will go away with time. And that's that desensitization process that you go through. And once they get it, and the other thing is that there's nothing wrong with you. Again, I would say that over and over. There's nothing wrong with you. You just got a reactive body, and you're a little sensitive. One of the national conferences, several of the self-help groups that were using my book, they had these pins that I just loved. It said, "So I'm sensitive." And it was great because they said, yeah, I'm not going to sleep before my presentation, but that's okay. That's just the way I am. See, back when they were still in the throes of panic disorder, they, oh my gosh, I'm not sleeping. This is terrible. I'm going to screw up on my presentation. People are going to laugh at me. Then, and they do all kinds of catastrophic thinking rather than just accepting. That's just the way I am.
I love it.
And it's okay. I'll sleep good the night after my presentation.
Right. Yes.
So those are some issues that you do. And again, all of these are normal issues because everything that we call the disorder is just an exaggeration of something that's normal. We all have anxiety. We all have depression. It's when it starts interfering with your life and becoming exaggerated that we call it a disorder, right? But they're things that are common to all the human conditions.
I really like that you have addressed it in that fashion because so many people are absolutely afraid to seek therapy because of the stigma around the word therapy or going to a therapist and society viewing them in a way that, really brings them down or they're looked down upon. And so I think that is crucial in people being able to go and seek assistance because we all, and this goes probably into your book, your other book about why God giving us emotions. We all have emotions that we're wired with. And again, some of us are just a little bit more adept at handling certain things versus someone else, but their strength may be my weakness. And so this is really important. Maybe you can touch on this a little bit as well.
Well, let me hit two things that are really important for long-term recovery, and a lot of people call it relapse prevention now. But one of the things that's important for long-term recovery, again, is this concept that there's really nothing wrong with me. I just have a reactive body, and that's a normal variation. And it just means that I have to keep short accounts. If I ignore stuff, then my body's going to react to it. And that's the second thing, is that symptoms are usually just a message that you have some business to take care of. And with anxiety disorders, a lot of times it would be relational stuff. They have some kind of relationship issue that they're not dealing with, and or something will come up in their life, and then it manifests as this free-floating anxiety, which then kicks off all the other stuff. In fact, I would frequently have somebody come back after 6 months or so, and I say, some of my symptoms have started. In fact, I'm thinking of one lady right now. And I said, so tell me what's going on in your life. Well, it's just the way it's always been. And as we talked, she said, well, I did go and clean out the storage container with my husband that I divorced, ex-husband. And this was a long-term abusive relationship, right? And so it's like, wait a minute, I think I see where this is coming from.
Sure.
Or people would have say, well, this happened, but it wasn't a big deal, right? And so the thing is your body's telling you it was a big deal to you, so deal with it. And a lot of times it's real issues. I would tell people, go through the checklist, okay, how's my primary relationship? How are the kids? How's work? How are my friendships? How are my long-term goals coming along? And usually within one of those things, they'll say, well, this happened, but it wasn't that big a deal. Well, your body's telling you it was a big deal. Deal with it. Come up with a plan for what you're going to do about it. And really, it's no more difficult than that a lot of times. But again, these are areas where people are oftentimes very blind to.
I think just listening to what you're saying about being aware of the symptoms that we're experiencing and then going, okay, I do have something that I need to address here. I think that that's important. A lot of times we're just saying, what's wrong with me? There's something worse. There's nothing I can think of that I did or whatever. But yet our subconscious then is telling us, yes, that's the case. There is something going on. And I love how you have shared that and have simplified that, because we just make things so complex in just looking at things.
Yeah. And really, people are easy to understand once you kind of find out what's going on. So we all have similar types of drivers. In fact, that's probably a good segue back into what emotions are all about. Because emotions are all about needs that are pressing on you. In fact, I, with my clients, would divide them into basically 3 baskets. You have your positive emotions, joy, excitement, all that type of stuff, and that's when a need's going to be met, right?
Okay.
And I don't deal with those, so I just kind of put that in that basket over there. And the 3 that I deal with would be threat, and when you experience threat, then you're going to either have fear or anger. And that has to do with how you're interpreting whether you're able to manage the threat or not. If the threat is manageable, I'll get angry and take it out. If the threat is unmanageable, I'll get afraid. I'll get some kind of anxiety. So that's fear. So we got the positive stuff, we got threat, and then the 3rd basic basket is loss. And loss would be your sadness, depression constellation, all those things put together. And it's really no more difficult than that. In fact, you can work backwards. If you're experiencing anger, then you're feeling threatened somewhere. So is the threat real? And of course, the other thing is your behavior appropriate or not? Those types of things. If you're experiencing anxiety, again, there's a threat somewhere. And of course, with panic disorders, because their body's out of control and all that type of stuff. The other thing about this is when we're talking about anger, I think of it in a very broad sense. So when you are irritated, that's low-level anger.
Okay.
And then when you're angry, that's kind of mid-level, and rage would, of course, be the dial's way up. But it's all, and we have literally probably a couple hundred different words for the different levels of anger that we experience, but it's the same basic emotion as a result of threat. In fact, the positive aspect of anger is it's what fuels or what energizes you whenever you set limits. So when you're saying, excuse me, you're stepping on my toes, there's some irritation, some low-level anger that's fueling that. In fact, when you deal with people that are having angry issues, of course, the first step is the walkaway strategies. You got to cool down, but then also to start to be able to tune into those early signs that something's bugging you and deal with it then when you have control, right? Not to wait until it's at a very high level. It's kind of like with parenting, right? A lot of times people, well, they'll do the broken record. Drykers used to say they're swatting flies. I told you need to do this.
Right.
You haven't done this yet.
I love it. Yes.
Something's going to happen if you don't do that. You better get up and do that, right? And at some level, your anger gets high enough to where you take action, right?
Yeah.
Part of being an effective parent is learning to, if you're not willing to get up and do something, just don't say anything, right?
Right.
But if you're going to set a limit, get up and take care of it right now when you're in control of yourself. Because if you wait till your anger's high, then you do all those crazy kind of limits. You're not going to ride your bike till you're 21, that type of stuff.
Right.
So get in there, and you're never going to have to do it again. So,
that's pretty interesting.
So yeah, so and with fear, of course, apprehension to panic, right? And all it means is there's a threat somewhere. And sadness, of course, is loss. Yeah. So that's basically all you need to know to understand emotions. And of course, we go into research, and they subdivide them in all kinds of categories. And I think they've got 6 pathways now that they've identified for different emotions. But basically, I think from a practical, everyday perspective, you can put them into those 3 baskets, and the positive stuff, threat, and loss, and that makes it very simple to understand what's happening.
I love how simplified this is. Let's talk about your latest book, though. Because I think anger is something that we are seeing so much of in news stories that are coming on just repeatedly throughout the day. And so I'd like to see if you can address some of those and also share with the audience about your book so that they can see why it's so important for them to get a copy of this in their hands.
Right. Well, and let me say the way the book is structured, again, my teaching background, it's a series of lessons, but I follow four people. So a man and a woman who are explosive and a man and a woman who are suppressing anger. And you kind of follow them through the chapters to how they deal with the various issues around anger. And again, different people, have different things going on, but essentially there's three areas that you look at. Number one, the source of the anger. Is there a real threat, or is there some kind of irrational thinking going on?
Huh.
And in our society today, unfortunately, there's a lot of irrationality and, of course, a lot of anger as a result of it. Second thing, of course, is the intensity of the anger, especially for people where they flare very quickly. Learning how to manage that intensity so that you can re-engage your logical processes again. And of course, the third area is your behaviors. Are your behaviors appropriate or not?
Mm-hmm.
And I say anger is appropriate. There's a real threat. If the level of intensity is appropriate for the threat, and if your behavior is going to minimize that threat with the least amount of harm to yourself and others. If you meet those criteria, then your anger is, you're managing, and it's being expressed in an appropriate way. So, of course, inappropriate means you're just flaring, you're getting way angry over little things. There really is no threat. Or you're doing things that are hurtful, that are damaging people and relationships, and then we call that, inappropriate. So, and all three of those for different people, they have different combinations of those they have to deal with.
I think that's very interesting. And so, what are some really good self-awareness symptoms to look for before it gets to the point where it is moving to the next level? So when we're just maybe at the
Well, for people, who flash very quickly and kind of go from 0 to 1,000, learning to stop when they start to feel anger, and walk away. And literally, like with domestic violence, as you know, a lot of times that's one of the first things you lock in is a walk away strategy if the people will do that. And then they cool down, and then later on you can engage with whatever's going on, the issue at a more rational level. Um, with people where they tend to suppress anger, and so they do passive aggressive things to people. That's where you get back at people and those sneaky underhanded ways and stuff. A lot of times it's a matter of reconnecting with the emotional network. And the way I have them do that is I have them identify specific behaviors or specific things that go on inside of them with their different emotions. So it's kind of like, it's amazing how out of touch a lot of people are. The guy is sitting in the chair and he's ripping the arms off the chair as he talks about something, and you say, well, you seem angry about that. Oh, no, I'm fine. And the
right,
body language is clear. There's a lot of rage happening.
right.
So what you have that person do is you say, okay, what I want you to do is during the day, I want you to, periodically every couple hours or so, just say, what am I feeling? Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I mad? Am I excited? Really simple words, and you identify what's going on. You also look for behaviors. What do I do when I'm angry? Well, I rip arms off chairs. Okay, when I'm doing that, or that tells me I'm angry at something. And then you'll have happy behavior, you'll have sad behavior. And as you learn that, they become like the little lights, the dashboard on the dashboard of your car, the oil light or the generator light or things of that nature, telling you something needs to be taken care of.
Uh-huh.
And then usually all you got to do is go through the right. Again, you're okay. How's my mate? How my kids? How's my work? And usually something will pop up, and you'll say, well, this happened, but it's okay. I wasn't that big a deal to me. Well, your body is telling you
Yeah.
it is a big deal to you. So decide what you're going to do about it. And it's no more difficult than that. Although it takes time for a person to reconnect that emotional network if they've really been out of touch with their body and with their emotions for a long time. But they can do it. And then again, you start acting as things come up, and you start dealing with them when they're at a lower level. Still, instead of waiting for them to build up to the point where you explode. And that, of course, usually doesn't do any good for anybody.
Very true. That's very true.
Right.
But we're seeing a lot of
Yeah.
anger that is happening in society now as a whole, on a social level, based on political things that are happening. And then we're also seeing things that are happening on a more active, targeted audience in a number of areas. Are these two similar in respect, or are they something quite different when we're talking about anger?
Well, no, I mean, there's a lot of things going on in our society right now. For one thing, we're a much less civil society than we used to be. And um, I mean, you look at, for example, rap music, right? What are the themes in rap music? It's defiance of authority, women are objects, and
Right.
unfortunately, the school that I taught at, we had a really high minority population, and a lot of the gals buy into those images just like the guys do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sets up really unrealistic expectations for what relationships are about, and how you're supposed to interact. And of course, that's going to generate a lot of anger. Uh, we don't teach people to be polite anymore. And of course, the whole self-esteem thing that's going on, where people get, the trophy just for showing up instead
Sure.
of for actually accomplishing something. All that stuff kind of contributes to it. So society, it used to be when I grew up, way back when, most of the things in society reinforced what a successful adult would be. And when you look at TV, music, movies, all of that stuff today, it's almost counter to it. I mean, what's a successful teenage movie going to be? It's going to be a kid defying authority. All the adults are stupid. I'm doing risky behavior with no consequences, that type of stuff. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
models that are being presented. And, and of course, my generation started back in the 60s with, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And,
Well, let me
fight
ask
the machine and all that stuff.
let me ask you though, by
Yeah.
having a society that is feeding into this kind of behavior, I am going to think about how that plays a part on each individual person's self-esteem and how they deal with it that way, along with a lot of these other behaviors and feelings such as anger, sort of all feeding into this particular issue. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, and there's such an overemphasis on self-esteem. Self-esteem is just a small part, or not small, but it's a part of your self-concept, right?
Okay.
And by only looking at self-esteem instead of your overall self-concept, what does it mean to be a man or a woman? What are relationships about? What's a healthy relationship look like? I was just reading about a report where I was talking about with sex, that really good sex has to involve intimacy, and if that just mechanical sex, which is what gets pushed today, right? You want to have
Right.
a lot of sex as much as you can, every day as you can, and the intimacy component is totally left out. And of course, texting and the video games and the pornography. I mean, look at the terrible effects of pornography is having on our young men, especially. A lot of them, they cannot have a real relationship with a real woman because they've got all these images they've been imprinting on since they were, started in their teenage years. And it's so
Right.
prevalent nowadays. And so all these things cause a lot of very irrational, unrealistic thinking, which again generates anger. I mean, you're seeing all these articles about, the sex robots and how they're going to replace real relationships now. And it's sad because we're losing a lot of what really makes us human and what makes relationships worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to get into it a lot, but again, I'm a Christian. I come from the perspective that as we throw God out more and get more into humanism, that seems to fuel a lot of it. We are rapidly approaching the first century culture. The Greeks and the Romans back in the first century. It's amazing the parallels that we see between the way they reacted and the way we are today. Uh, but it's a lot of things that are all coming together right now.
I think it's so tough to address when you have it in such a widespread normalization type of society. And so I think then that would have to go back to parents and starting instilling things from a very, very young age in what's healthy and how to deal with emotions and how to respond to those emotions in a very healthy way. And
Yeah.
um, it seems like we leave, or as a whole, our children in the hands of other people who may not have the same belief system that we do, or they may respond to things very differently, and then the child picks up on those with that, along with the peers that they have who is in the same type of environment. And so my biggest thought, aside from going back to parenting itself, is how then do we kind of make that shift back and take back to getting some really good values instilled in society? Or
I
is
mean,
there an
it's a
answer,
tough
you
sell.
know?
I'll say that first.
Yeah.
Well, I think there is ultimately, but it's going to take time. In a lot of ways, we're like an adolescent with our technology. You know how
Mm,
adolescents, they abuse things until they mature a little bit, like start to realize, well, sitting on top of the car as it goes down the freeway is probably not a good idea. You know, uh, and we're like that with a lot of our technology right now. We really haven't learned how to manage it in a healthy way. Now, I love technology. Let me say that I'm a real techno geek when it comes to all the different stuff with computers and things. But at the same time, I'm real comfortable turning it off. And I remember, well, like in classroom, uh, a lot of kids, to have them put their smartphone away, it's like you see them actually going through withdrawal with it. They get that little dopamine push every time they get a tweet or some kind of a
right.
incoming message or whatever, and it's tough. But I kind of digress, because a lot of the problem today is the disintegration of the family. Uh,
Mhm.
there are some really good, healthy families out there, but they're becoming fewer as we get more and more single parent families, especially single parent families with young parents who really don't have the skills. At the school
Right.
I taught at, probably about half of the young gals had kids, and they were single parents and they were struggling. I mean, that's the recipe for poverty, right? No high school education, having a kid, uh, and you're pretty much doomed to having poverty for the rest of your life, unless you're really an exceptional person. And a lot of these gals were, but it's tough. And we kind of encourage that with the way we look at things. I mean, we look at some Hollywood person who's a single parent who's got millions of dollars and nannies and everything. So we say it's easy to do. You can do it.
Right.
And for the kid with no high school education who's trying to flip burgers, and that job's going to go away in another 10 years or so as automation comes in. It's tough because they don't have the time or the skills to parent the way they're supposed to parent. In fact, when I used to do parenting classes, the key to being an effective parent is really very simple. It's relationship. If you have a solid relationship with that child and you've invested in them and they know you love them, that will take you through adolescence with them. I mean, you look at people in prison. We have a prison minister at church, and most of the guys, no father at home, and they grew up in environments that were pretty dicey. And so, that accounts for a lot of where their values and stuff came from. Um, but I've seen people who had terrible parenting skills, when you look at the book ways to do and stuff, right? But they were just so warm and loving, and the kids knew it. Kids came out great. And I've seen parents who did everything by the book, but they really didn't have the relationship, right? They were on their smartphones. I mean, the
Uh-huh.
saddest thing is to go to a restaurant and see the parents and the kids, everybody on their smartphone, and nobody talking, right? And that's the family that's going to be headed for trouble when the kids move into adolescence, because they're not going to buy into the parent as a consultant, as somebody that they can go to.
Right.
And unfortunately, the way we're disengaged in our culture, I see just more of that happening and more problems.
So interpersonal skills here is super important by making communication happen with the family unit.
Yeah, and it takes time. See, and that's the thing, is to have a relationship, whether it's with your mate or whether it's with your kid, requires time. And we live in a society where there's so much stuff robbing us of our time.
Oh, this
I
is
used to tell
true.
parents, when you
Yeah,
get in the car, turn the radio off. My
this is true.
niece, I like a 13-year-old, and when she comes home from school, she's got a basket. She's got to put her phone in, so she can't be running around the house with her phone, checking in with her friends and stuff. And
Uh-huh.
but it forces them to do creative stuff, right? So things like that. They're very simple, but it's hard to get people to do that, because then the kid's going to be bugging you, I'm bored, and of course when my kids would tell me that, I'd say, well, it's okay to be bored, and if you really need something to do, I got some chores. Otherwise,
Right.
if you can find creative things on your own to do, that being bored really sparks creativity. Of course, they would go off and find something to do. So
Yes, I
yeah.
I became one of those creative children because I didn't want to get stuck doing chores, but I had them to do on weekends, and I still think that a sense of having that responsibility instills so much. And I think we also have sort of allowed our children to get away from having different responsibilities. And so they're left to not have an understanding of a certain foundation that is necessary that they to equip them for their future. And so while I'm with you, I love technology. I do. I just think that we have to have some boundaries on it. And it is really hard
Oh yeah.
sometimes to do that. And I really like what you said. I've
Mhm.
always spoke on other shows and when I was doing radio that, we live in a drive-through society, but I like how you have coined this much better, that it's robbing us of our time. I think that that is really crucial
Yeah.
because nowadays it does take two parents to make a household income just to make the bills. And so
Mhm.
time is then the big, you know, thief.
Although I know several families where they've made the choice to have a single income and then just work around that. So one parent could be with the kids, especially when they're younger. So
Hmm.
it's still possible, although it is a
And so let me ask,
challenge. And
yeah, does that means
yes,
making
yes.
a little bit of sacrifices to have a really healthy family then? Because you don't have to
Well,
compete
yeah, you're
with
not.
the Joneses.
Well, yeah, it gets into keeping up with the Joneses and having all the latest technology and everything. It's you have to decide what's important in your life. And again, that's a hard sell, because advertising has been very effective at convincing people they got to have it all. If you don't have it all, then you're missing out. And that's the good stuff over there.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Well, let's talk
sometimes
for
I feel like a voice in the wilderness.
now, are you doing
Yeah,
one-on-one coaching like via Skype or anything like that? Or do you have a
I'm just
practice?
doing a little bit at the church.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly I'm doing it through the church as a pastoral counselor. So I'm not seeing a lot of people, and it's kind of whoever is sent my way, and it's interesting how that works, and that way I can spend more time with them. I'm not bound by I got to be 50-minute hour, 10-minute break, and next person in. Sometimes it takes more than that. So
Right, it does. It does. But for those of the audience here who would like to gain more knowledge about how to address these issues, whether it's for themselves, a family member, or how to make their family unit stronger, can you share with the audience where they can find information in connecting with you and obtaining your books?
sure. Well, and there's two places. The easiest way is to go to my website, because then from there you can connect to every place else. And the address is whyemotions.com. And then I have a YouTube channel that's it's starting to get more things on. I've got a lot of things on anger, anxiety, trigger points, and I think the next series of things I'm going to do will be related to intimacy
Mm,
and kids who come, people who come, adults from dysfunctional families, some of their traits, and some of the things to do about that. And I'll probably start some of that during the summer. I'll launch my next series of videos that I'll be putting up there. And of course, you can find the books either at the YouTube or on the website. It has links in, and they're available both on Amazon and Smashwords if you do the other formats outside of Kindle. So.
fantastic. And if you could leave the audience with just three really pertinent points, I think that they could use right as they are finishing our show today.
Well, that's a big question. I think
Or maybe the most important thing that
I
you
think I
think is.
think normalizing yourself, because we have all of these labels we put on ourselves. I'm this. In fact, people would come into my practice. I say, so tell me what's going on. Well, I'm panic disordered and I'm codependent, and they rattle off all the stuff. And I say, so what does that mean? And they couldn't tell me. They just had a lot of labels, right? And I
Right,
coming back and saying, well, I'm just funny that way, but I'm normal. That normalization oftentimes becomes a real important part of healing, is understanding everybody's got quirks. You got your quirks, I got my quirks. Just ask my wife. Uh, and it's okay. It's a matter of managing your quirks so that they don't interfere with your life in a big way. So normalizing yourself becomes really important. And I think finding relationships, because we really do live in a culture that's very impoverished with relationships, and you see that with the new generation coming up. We saw it like with interviews and stuff. A lot of the I could call them kids, but a lot of the young adults, their interview skills and stuff are very poor because they were texting. They were on their computer games and stuff. So you need to interact with people. In fact, if you have problems or some issue that you're dealing with, it's not going to be resolved in a 15-minute session once a week. It's going to be
right.
resolved in the context of a relationship. I know when I'd had people from dysfunctional backgrounds, I would often tell them, you need to identify one or two healthy people, and we talk about how you do that, and you need to hang around them. And after 6 months of hanging around them, you'll be surprised at the impact that they'll have on you in that relationship. And at first, of course, the complaint is always, that person is so boring. There's absolutely no drama in their life.
Right, right.
But after a few months, it gets to feel really comfortable, and they begin to internalize a lot of those cues for what being around a healthy person is like. And they're out there. I know people say there is no healthy family, there is no, everybody's dysfunctional, but that's not true. There are healthy people out there. I mean, like I said, they got their quirks. Nobody's 100%, but there are good places to go find people. So go find them, hang around them, and you'd be surprised how healing that in itself can be.
Hmm.
And I think the spiritual side is the other thing. I know it's not fashionable to talk about it, but to be happy, you basically need just a few things. You need, number one, you need to have a relationship, right? You need to have a purpose in life. Why am I getting up? Freud talked about, work and love, right? But I'd also include in that the spiritual foundation. So when things fall apart, you've got some kind of a rock that you can fall back on that helps to make sense. In fact, when you look at profiles of people where they've gone through some horrific thing and they've come out, reasonably intact at the end, you will find that they've had a relationship and they've had some kind of a rock to stand upon when their world fell apart.
Hmm.
And purpose, of course, is the other thing. And I think with all the automation going on and the changes in societies, that's going to be an increasingly challenging thing for people to do. The next 20 years actually, next 10, 15 years is going to be amazing change.
This is very interesting. Well, I am super excited to pick up copies of all your books and really delve in myself. I think that there is so much there that I can learn and also pass on to others. And I encourage those of you who are watching also to get a copy of each one of his books. They are all going to be very, very pertinent and applicable. And even if some of the things you think you have a handle on, maybe you'll know somebody who doesn't, and you can get it into their hands as well. I want to thank you so much for being on our show today.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk about these things. I have a real passion for them. So
I love it.
it's
I
really
think that,
needed nowadays.
yes, I think that this is an area that needs to really be addressed. And what I just really want to share with the audience is that you're normal. And
Yep. Yep.
that is the most important thing for you to know right now, is you are normal.
Yeah. Well, thank you very
Again,
much.
thank you so much for being on the show. I want to thank those of you who had an opportunity to see the broadcast today. And if you would please share the broadcast with those who can definitely use the tools, or share it with others that can, that would be much appreciated as well. And we wish you a great day.
Yes.